I was lying in bed with a fever so high that I couldn't move. I asked my eldest son to bring me a glass of water, thinking he would at least do that much. But instead of water, he brought me a glass of beer and then splashed it on me while I was sick in bed. From the doorway, I heard laughing, and there was my son's wife, clapping and laughing at me. My son was also laughing, holding the empty cup. I couldn't believe what was happening. I was feverish and confused, but that moment stayed clear in my mind. "Clean the house before we get back, okay?" they said. I had put up with Mark and his wife's selfish behavior for a long time, but this was too much for me to handle. "Yes, I will clean it," I said, forcing the words out of my sore throat so they could hear. "My name is Helen, and I'm a 73-year-old housewife. My husband George is 75 years old. Now that he's retired, he teaches calligraphy to children at a nearby community center. He's been practicing calligraphy since he was young and always dreamed of teaching it after he retired. I'm happy to see him achieving his dream and going to the community center with a smile every day. We have 2 sons. Our younger son is married and has 2 children in elementary school. But our 44-year-old eldest son isn't married and still lives with us. He works part-time at a convenience store at night, but only about 4 days a week. He doesn't contribute any money to the household and just lives a lazy life. Both my husband and I have warned him many times, but he doesn't listen. He's not into gambling or in debt, so eventually my husband and I stopped trying to talk to him about it. Then, one day out of the blue, our eldest son suddenly announced, "I got married," and brought his wife home without even introducing her to us properly. She moved in as if it was the most natural thing in the world, and from that day on, I had to prepare meals for her too. I didn't mind cooking for my son's wife, but she didn't help with anything, not even cleaning up after meals. She didn't say thank you, and she even asked for a cup of coffee after dinner. My husband couldn't stand it anymore and warned our son and his wife sternly. After that, they stopped making unreasonable demands when my husband was around. However, when he wasn't home, my daughter-in-law started making requests like, "Mother-in-law, please take this dress to the cleaners for me." I thought she was being too selfish, and when I warned her about it, my son defended her. "It's just something you can do while you're out shopping. Don't be so stingy," he would say. But our son doesn't give us any money, even though we're feeding him and his wife for free. I thought it was unfair for them to ask for even more and was considering whether to talk to my husband about it. However, not wanting to start a fight between my husband and our son, I decided to wait a little longer and see what happened. So I held back once again and took my daughter-in-law's clothes to the cleaners as she asked. My husband and I usually visit our second son's family in Canada about twice a year. We were planning to visit our second son's family during the upcoming week-long holiday. We visit them often, and they sometimes visit us too, so our grandchildren have become very attached to us. We had already bought toys that our grandchildren love as gifts, and we were planning to buy a roll cake on our way there. When we visit, we usually take the sleeper train instead of flying because we enjoy the scenery along the way. Now that we have more free time, the train ride is more relaxing for us. The day before our trip, I was feeling unusually excited and went shopping after seeing my husband off to his regular calligraphy class. On my way back, I stopped by a cake shop that was selling handmade cookies. I thought the cookies would last longer than the cake, so I bought some for the grandchildren. As I was heading home, picturing the happy faces of my grandchildren, it started to drizzle. I hurried home, but the rain got heavier, so I decided to stop by a convenience store to buy an umbrella. By the time I got there, my clothes were soaked. I thought about waiting for the rain to stop, but since I was already wet and wanted to warm up with a hot bath, I bought an umbrella and hurried home. When I got home and was about to take a bath, my eldest son's wife came in and said, "Helen, are you about to take a bath? I have to go out now, so let me use the bath first, and please start preparing dinner early." Then she closed the bathroom door, even though it's not her house. I changed my clothes and started making dinner, trying to ignore her. While cooking, I began to sneeze. I worried that I might catch a cold just before our trip tomorrow. My eldest son's wife stayed in the bath for over an hour. The next morning, the day we were supposed to visit our second son's family, I woke up feeling sluggish, my throat hurt, and my nose was running. When I checked my temperature, it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I realized I had caught a cold from being out in the rain the day before. I told George to go alone this time because I didn't want to pass my cold on to the grandchildren. George suggested canceling the visit, but we already had the train tickets and we had the toys we bought as gifts, so I wanted him to go even if it was just him. I gave him the cookies I had bought the day before. Despite George's concern, I reassured him that it was just a slight fever and a minor cold, and that I would be okay after taking some medicine and resting at home. George usually doesn't talk much to our eldest son and his wife, but that day he told them I wasn't feeling well and made them promise to take care of the housework. After seeing George off with a smile, I stayed home to rest. I was about to go back to bed when I overheard my eldest son and his wife talking. They were complaining, "Oh, such a hassle. It's just a cold, right? But now that Dad's gone, we can be free for a while." I couldn't believe they were saying this, considering they lived in our house without contributing to the expenses, but it wasn't unusual for them. I pointed out, "You do realize the only reason you can live here is because of your father, right?" My son, Mark, and his wife got upset and replied, "We're doing you a favor by living with you in your old age. Most people hate living with their in-laws." It was ironic because they had moved in with us without being asked and yet acted like they were doing us a huge favor. Even though I was feeling sluggish and wanted to rest, I ignored their remarks and went back to my room. Later that evening, my daughter-in-law came into my room and woke me up. "Mother-in-law, you're not planning on skipping cooking just because you're feeling a little sick, are you? You know I can't cook, right?" I couldn't believe she was telling me this at 35 years old. I felt sick and wanted them to figure out their meals by themselves. My husband should have warned them before he left in the morning. I tried to ignore her and go back to sleep, but she wouldn't leave. I thought it would be better to eat something light and take some medicine, so I forced myself to get up and head to the kitchen to prepare some food. As I was cooking, Mark came home. He saw me in the kitchen wearing a mask, but he didn't say a word, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Instead, he demanded, "Hey, the bath isn't ready yet." It didn't matter to Mark and his wife whether I was sick or not. Knowing they wouldn't listen anyway and wanting to rest as soon as possible, I finished preparing the meal and then went to prepare the bath. When I came back to the living room, Mark and his wife were happily chatting while eating. "We're going on a trip abroad the day after tomorrow, so please don't spread your cold to us," my daughter-in-law said, surprising me with their sudden plans. I had no idea they were going on a 3-week trip to Europe. While I hadn't heard about this before, I was relieved they wouldn't be home starting from the day after tomorrow. On the morning of their departure, my cold had worsened, leaving me bedridden with a 103-degree fever. I was thirsty, but my headache was so severe that I couldn't even lift my head. Despite my condition, Mark came to me and demanded, "Hey, cook us some food. You can still cook even if you have a cold." Tears welled up in my eyes as I managed to say, "Eat out." Mark frowned but said nothing as he left the room. Before he left, I asked him to bring me a glass of water. I thought he would at least do that much, but instead, he brought a glass full of beer and splashed it all over me while I lay in bed with a high fever. I heard loud laughter from the doorway. My daughter-in-law was clapping her hands in amusement, and Mark was laughing as he held the empty cup. It was unbelievable. Though I was feverish, that sight was burned into my memory. "Make sure you clean the house before we get back," they taunted as they left. I had tolerated Mark and his wife's selfishness up until now, but I couldn't stand it any longer. "Yes, I'll keep it clean," I managed to say, loud enough for them to hear, despite the pain in my throat. After they left, I didn't even have the energy to wipe the beer from my face, and I fell asleep as I was. When I woke up, I felt somewhat refreshed, though groggy. I remembered being splashed with beer, but surprisingly, I didn't feel sticky, and the covers on my bed had been changed. Just as I was wondering what had happened, my husband George walked in with a basin. Seeing me sitting up, he placed his hand on my forehead and asked, "Are you okay?" I was confused. Wasn't George supposed to be with our second son's family? I tried to ask but couldn't voice it out. Noticing my confusion, George began to explain. He had taken the sleeper train to visit our second son's family but was worried about me and decided to return early. He didn't trust Mark and his wife to take care of me, and our second son's family also suggested he should hurry back, so he flew home. When George arrived home, he found me exhausted in bed with a lingering smell of beer. He quickly cleaned my face with a damp towel, tidied up the room, and took care of me while I slept for a full day. When he asked what happened, I tried to explain, but my voice failed me. The memory of Mark splashing beer on me brought tears to my eyes. Seeing this, George brought me water and apologized, saying, "I shouldn't have asked you to do anything, just rest now." He then prepared some porridge for me, which was ready when I woke up. His kindness made me cry again. Thanks to George's care, I regained my strength in about 2 days. When I finally told him everything Mark and his wife had done, forcing me to cook while I was sick, throwing beer on me, and going on their trip, George's face turned stern. He said, "I can't stand it anymore." I usually calmed him down, but this time I couldn't bring myself to pacify him because I was just as upset. George and I had been secretly planning to build a new house and had moved into a rental apartment. We sold our old house quickly after a buyer showed interest. Originally, we intended to keep the old house for Mark and his wife, but after their treatment, we decided not to. The old house was now an empty lot and Mark and his wife were shocked to find it gone. The new house will be finished in about 2 weeks, and we've already moved some of our historic belongings and furniture there. We disposed of Mark and his wife's belongings. When we told them this, Mark shouted, "Are you kidding me? I'll report you to the police." His wife was also yelling in the background. At that moment, George took over the phone, and I put it on speaker mode. George's voice was cold and firm as he addressed our eldest son. "Go ahead and tell the police. I'll tell them too. You threw beer on your sick mother and went on vacation abroad. You even forced her to do housework while she was ill. Who's the bigger sinner here, you for mistreating your mother or us for disposing of your things?" His expression was like that of a villain as he spoke to our son. Mark retorted, "This has nothing to do with selling the house. Where are we supposed to live now? Where are you even staying?" George replied sharply, "That house was originally ours. It's our right to sell it. Besides, you're no longer our son. Don't contact us anymore." With that, he hung up. 2 weeks later, we received a call informing us that our new house was completed. George and I went to see it, guided by the carpenter, a friend of George's. The carpenter, around 60 years old, and the site supervisor showed us around the house. We had designed it as a single-story, accessible home with our retirement in mind. It was even more beautiful than we had imagined. The furniture we had left in the living room was already moved in by the carpenters, who said it was no problem as George had helped them in the past. We started living in our new house, which was more comfortable than we had imagined. Our life was peaceful without our eldest son and his wife around. However, about a month after moving in, our eldest son and his wife showed up at our new house. We hadn't given them our new address, and our younger son Mark and his wife shouldn't have either. They must have hired a detective or something to find us. "Hey, it's not fair for you to sell the house, dispose of our stuff, and then move to such a nice place by yourselves. As your eldest son, I have the right to live here, don't I?" Mark demanded, glaring at us with large bags in hand. We were stunned to see them at our doorstep, clearly intent on moving in. Just then, as they were about to step inside, the front door opened. "Mark, what are you doing here? Are you trying to cause trouble again? You're old enough to manage on your own," Stephen said with a look of disbelief on his face. Beside him were his wife and their 2 grandchildren. They were visiting because the new house had just been finished. After a bit of relaxing, Stephen's family went to a nearby convenience store. "Who are those people?" asked Sophia, the 5th grader, looking innocent. The husband, who was about to ask Mark and his wife to leave, suddenly had an idea. "While Stephen's family is staying for a week, you two should stay here too. But I won't let you stay forever," he said, letting everyone into the house. In the living room, Mark and his wife took the first seats on the sofa. "Man, I'm beat. Mother-in-law, can I have some coffee?" "I'll take mine black," Mark said casually. Stephen's wife was surprised by how casually Mark and his wife made their request. The grandchildren quickly went up to Mark and his wife. "Why can't you two do that?" At first, Mark and his wife argued, but the kids' constant questions didn't stop, and by the end of the week, they were both exhausted. Mark's wife especially didn't like being called auntie and told the kids not to call her that. When the kids asked, "Why not? You're an auntie," she was shocked. Even Stephen and I couldn't help but laugh. After Stephen and his family left, we told Mark and his wife they had to go. They were so tired from the kids' endless questions that they left without much resistance. A few months later, we got a message from Mark asking if we could lend them some money. They had been living in our house, eating our food, and not paying for anything. Mark had been making enough money from his job at the convenience store, so it wasn't a problem before. Now that they had been kicked out, they should have started paying their own rent and living expenses. Instead, they kept spending money like before, living off borrowed money and having no savings. Mark's only income was from working 4 days a week at the convenience store, and his wife didn't plan to work. It was outrageous for them to ask us for money. We told them we would never lend them money or help them again and blocked Mark's number. A few days later, while my husband and I were out, we got a call from our home security company. They sent us video footage showing Mark and his wife trying to break into our house through a window. It was sad that they were so desperate they tried to steal from us because they were broke. Fortunately, they didn't cause trouble for anyone else, but they were caught by security and handed over to the police. They were released because they were family, but not before getting a stern lecture. Since then, Mark and his wife stopped trying to break into our house. We blocked their calls, so we don't hear from them anymore. Our second son, Stephen, also got a request for money from Mark. It turns out Mark had borrowed money from loan sharks and was now running away because he couldn't pay it back. Stephen told Mark to pay back his own debts and blocked Mark's number too. We don't know what happened to Mark and his wife after that, but we've chosen to forget about them. My husband and I are enjoying a peaceful life now. He used to teach calligraphy at the local community center but now teaches at home in a special room we set up for that. When Stephen and his family visit, the grandchildren and other kids take calligraphy classes and seem to have a great time making friends. I'm thankful for these peaceful days and making the most of each one.